I was 13 years old and school had just been let out for the summer. I had a good friend that lived in a nicer area of town, and his parents let me spend weeks at a time staying at their house. He had a neighbor who lived across the street from him that always had broken down cars, TVs, microwaves, and just general clutter in their driveway. There lived a middle-aged woman and a middle-aged man. We hardly saw the man and only saw the woman if she was taking care of the yard. They had a large cornfield to the side of their home that was between their house and my friend's. Anytime you had the misfortune of crossing paths with this lady, she would give you the evilest death glare you could imagine. She would just stare you down until you were out of eyesight. She just gave off really creepy vibes. My friend and I loved to fish, and he had a lake about 2 miles away from his house. To get to the lake, you had to walk down the road in front of the creepy lady's house. We would go fishing 2 to 3 days a week and would spend all day there swimming, fishing, and generally having a good time. One day, we stayed way too late at the lake and found ourselves walking home around 11 p.m. We knew we were in deep shit and began running home. I was a fat kid with asthma at the time, so we had to make multiple stops. Unfortunately, one of these stops was in his neighbor's driveway, leaning up against one of the broken cars. We heard the front door open and the lady pokes her head out and yells, "Get the heck off my property, you little shits." She closes the door and we start fast walking towards his house. We hear the door open again, but this time she has a shotgun in her hands and it is pointed at us. My friend yells, "Gun!" And we both book it and dive into her cornfield army crawling in opposite directions. You could hear her footsteps thumping as she ran for the field. Once she reached it, I could no longer hear anything. No rustling of the corn, just silence. Then out of the blue I heard a gunshot. Boom. Followed by the pumping of the shotgun and another gunshot. You could tell she was just shooting in random directions. I heard some of the shot hitting some of the corn to my right and then to my left. She must have run out of shells because the gunfire stopped. Once I realized that she was out of shots, I stood up and ran faster than I ever had towards my friend's house. He was already there, waiting in the backyard for me. We lay in his grass watching the neighbor weave in and out of the corn looking for us. 20 minutes probably went by and she went back into her house. We knew this because you could hear the door slam. We went into his house and woke his parents up, who were mad since we were so late. We told them the story and they didn't believe us at first. They thought we were making it up. After an hour of attempting to convince them, they finally believed us because they could see how shaken up we were. And since we didn't have our fishing gear anymore, they called the police, who ended up responding extremely quickly. We told them what had happened and they went to talk to the neighbor. Apparently, when they knocked on the door, she was still holding the shotgun and her boyfriend/husband was in the middle of taking a hit off of his meth pipe. They were both arrested and we never saw them again. Shortly, their house was foreclosed on and torn down. A new neighbor built on the land, and they are very lovely people. I'm a 22-year-old female, but this story took place when I was 21. I live in a small town and I work in a pub in the town center. 2 pubs, 2 small shops, and a bank. On my walk home, I walk past one of the shops, which also has a small bus shelter next to it. Buses run every hour-ish, but none run after 8 p.m. After that, it's just residential housing, and then my house near the end of the road. All in all, from my job and my house, it's about an 8-minute walk. My town is usually dead after about 10 p.m. as everything is closed, and I would genuinely say it was relatively safe. Never had a problem with walking home alone. This incident happened on New Year's Eve, going into New Year's Day, so the pubs were open later. I finished my shift at about 1:30 a.m. and I, my boss, my boyfriend, and 2 other coworkers went to the pub next door for a drink before we went home. It was about 2:30 a.m. when I realized what time it was and that I needed to leave. My boyfriend lives on the other side of town, and I wasn't staying at his that night. My boss insisted on driving me home, and I kept insisting that he stay as everybody else was enjoying themselves and talking about the Christmas period that we had at work. Same with my boyfriend. He insisted on walking me home, but I was adamant that I was fine, and it was less than 10 minutes. Anyways, after a lot of pushback, I told him I was walking home. I really enjoyed walking without headphones and having a cigarette, especially after a shift, because it genuinely is so silent and peaceful. I didn't pass or see anybody until I got to walking past the shop. Like I mentioned previously, there is a small bus shelter next to it, and as I got closer, I realized there was a man sitting on the bench in the bus stop. Bear in mind, it is nearly 3 a.m. and even the pub we were at wasn't actually open anymore. They just let us in because we worked at the other pub. I didn't really think much of the man, but as I got closer, I realized I had served him at my shift earlier on in the night. He looked up as I was walking, and I realized he was sniffing some sort of drug, most likely cocaine, from his keys. I didn't actually know who he was, and I still don't, but he didn't seem threatening. He looked like he was kind of just chilling. Probably not the best choice of words, though, I guess. He did meet my eyes, and I was actually walking past the bus shelter. He said something along the lines of, "Sorry, darling, do you have a lighter I can borrow?" I was smoking as I was walking, so he knew I would have one. I stopped, and he was already walking towards me as I had, so I started digging one of the many lighters I had out of my bag. I was fully intent on just letting him keep it. I am not the type to stand with a 30-something-year-old man while he is lighting a cigarette. Then he asked me for a cigarette, but I had lit my last one, which I said. During this whole interaction, he was very close to me, but I was kind of frozen in place. I'd realized that I'd stopped and was standing with a man in a dead-end street where nobody was around. I was still in the part of town where there isn't housing for another couple of minutes, and if anyone had come out of the pub, I was too far away where they wouldn't have seen me. I just started mumbling something like, "Keep the lighter, I've got to go." But this man who I had spoken to for about 20 seconds told me to just stop for a second, and where my feet had started to turn to walk away, I stopped again. Side note, I know I should have just walked away, but I thought maybe it was innocent enough, and I didn't want to give him a reason to provoke him if I just walked away from him. This time his demeanor switched, and he wasn't very polite to start with, but it's like him telling me to stop made him realize that I was a young woman walking alone at this time of night. I genuinely get the chills thinking about what he said. He looked me up and down and said the following, "You know, I've been really angry and I've been waiting for someone to hurt all night. You shouldn't be walking around here alone." My legs literally turned to jelly in that moment. I didn't even know if my phone was in my pocket or in my bag. I looked around and then said, "I'm not alone. My boyfriend is waiting for me around the corner. I'll be with him in a minute," and smiled. Just a barefaced lie. My boyfriend was still in the pub and had no clue that this interaction was going on. I thought maybe I should walk back on myself and go back to the pub, but I just decided not to. My house was closer. The man smirked as if he knew I was talking absolute BS and said that he would walk with me to meet my boyfriend. There was no boyfriend waiting for me around the corner. I kept saying there was no need, but he was on my tail, rambling about how I don't understand him, I don't get it, and that I need to walk with him and he isn't going to hurt me. And this whole time I kept thinking that he was going to grab my hair or pull me to the ground, and that any minute he was going to realize there was no boyfriend waiting. I ended up pulling my phone out of my pocket and it opened to our work group chat, and I just typed a message about a man walking with me, realizing my phone was on 2% and thinking that I just wanted someone to know what was happening. I didn't dare to go call my boyfriend. This guy started mumbling about how I wasn't listening to him. And by some miracle, when we turned around the corner onto my street, this guy didn't realize my boyfriend wasn't there. Or maybe he did, but he didn't say anything. He did up his behavior though and started spewing the most perverted stuff to me, saying about how I was a pretty young girl and "I bet your boyfriend doesn't know how to handle you." The whole time I wasn't speaking, just speeding up and checking my phone discreetly. I realized that he was going to know where my house was, so I just thought I'm going to have to pretend one of these houses is mine. Otherwise, I will be leading him right to my house where my dad would be asleep at the back of the house. None the wiser. All of the houses on the street had a small gate and footpath leading to the door. So I chose a house with the light on and opened their gate. I turned to the guy and said, "This is me. See ya. Thanks for walking me," closing the gate behind me. I ran up to their door and shoved my key into the door that was not mine and hoped that this guy would leave and wouldn't wait for me to go inside the house. Thankfully, he didn't, and he started stumbling in the opposite direction, back down the street, away from where my actual house was. In what I thought was my only chance, I opened this gate and sprinted home. This guy clocked what I was doing instantly and started walking in my direction. By the time I got to my house, he had either not caught up quick enough or had given up. When I put my key in the door, I realized my dad had left his in the door internally, meaning I was locked out. I get my phone out and realize it had died in the time we were talking, so I just started banging on the door and my dad let me in after a couple of minutes. And that was it, but it was absolutely terrifying. I have not walked home alone since, and my boyfriend was so upset that he didn't push more and let him walk me home. Thankfully, I am okay and nothing physical happened to me. I'm a 14-year-old girl, and I, like the majority of teenagers, enjoy being home alone. My dad works from home, so very rarely does this happen, but when the opportunity arises, I will take it. One day, both my parents decided to take my brother to chess class and then go shopping in a strip mall nearby. They asked if I wanted to come, but seeing the chance to binge eat Halloween candy and watch Dexter with the sound turned all the way up, I decided to stay home. I do regret it now. They try to convince me to come, but I don't like going outside. Where are my fellow introverts at? And they left a couple minutes later. I settled in for a few hours of peace with a mountain of Twix and Kit Kats. Fight me, health nuts. And the glory that is Michael C. Hall. I don't know what chemicals those candy people put in this stuff, but I'm not complaining. After a few episodes, the candy was all gone, and all I had left were the shiny wrappers that I would probably sell my soul for, because I have an addiction. I went to throw them out and mourn the loss of the glorious chocolate caramel cookie that is Twix when I saw that the trash can was near overflowing. It was about 6:30 by now, but dark enough to basically be the middle of the night. I wasn't exactly comfortable to go outside in the dark, especially when the house next to me hasn't had anyone living in it for the past 2 years, which means bank people or whatever are constantly walking around it. However, the garbage bin is right next to the garage door, and I can get outside and back in about 5 seconds, so I decided to risk it. I went outside, threw the trash away, and as I was turning to go back in, I saw a man walking by. This isn't really that uncommon, as I live on a busy street and I live in an upper middle class area, so there's not a whole lot of crime and people go walking at night all the time. I thought it was kind of weird that he was wearing all black, because normally people want to be seen in the dark so they don't get hit by cars, but it didn't seem that strange. He was on his phone and didn't even look up at me, which I was thankful for because I was wearing a nightgown and had my hair a mess. I ran back inside and hit the button that closed the garage door. As it was slowly climbing down, the man raced inside. I was in shock. I stared at him. We made eye contact. He didn't have crazy eyes or anything. He looked perfectly normal. The garage door shut and he smiled wide. I shrieked and slammed the door that led into the garage shut and locked it. He started yelling at me about just wanting to be friends. Yeah, Creeper Man. I, a teenage girl home alone, will gladly befriend you. A man who just ran into my garage. I called my parents. I probably should have called the police, but I didn't want them to come home and have this strange man jump out and attack them once they got inside. They didn't pick up, of course. I texted them frantically, then called 911, who said they would send out a squad car. The next 10 minutes were probably the most frightening moments of my life. The operator stayed on the phone with me and told me to not go outside in case he had anyone else out there, but I could hear him in the garage. He didn't try to break the door down or anything. Instead, he scratched it and jiggled the doorknob and called for me to open the door, which was probably scarier than if he just tried to break the door down. I heard the garage door open and close, and then the police came. The guy was outside, sitting in front of the garage of the empty house next door. He said he was a landscaper and that he just wanted to talk with me, and that we had spoken before and were friends. I was basically hysterical at this point, and with my sugar adult brain, I couldn't even form coherent sentences. Screw you, chocolate. The cops did arrest him and my parents came home. They saw that I was alright and then seemed more concerned about the car that was in the garage than about me. I can't blame them. That car is older than I am and has sentimental value. I'm not going to go out at night ever, and I'm probably never going to be opening the garage door again. This happened back when our family moved to our new house in 2001. I was 8 years old and my sister was 10. Since we had just moved, my mom really wanted some new furniture to make our new home look nice. We weren't well off in the first place, but it was our first real home, meaning it wasn't a cruddy mobile home for once. We drove to a little value furniture shop that had a bunch of things to choose from. Of course, my sister and I, being typical siblings, were joking around with each other. She called me an ugly freak and I told her that her face was fat. Just normal things. Unfortunately, my mom couldn't find anything that she liked, so we left empty-handed. When we got into the car, she wanted to go to the grocery store and pick up a few things, so the trip wasn't a total waste. We drove along. My sister and I noticed a brown car following us, turning every corner, making every light, etc. We pointed it out to my mom and she just blew it off. Don't worry about it, guys. So we dropped it too. We were young and we completely forgot about it when we went to the general store and grabbed our snacks. Again, we got in the car and left for home. And again, the brown car started following us. Mom was getting a bit worried since we lived in another town 20 miles away. She told us it had to be somebody we knew. We had relatives living in the town, not just anyone we were really close to. Like they did before, they copied our route. The closer we were to home, the more paranoid my mother became and, in turn, fueled our fear. She told us to copy the license plate, but tried to assure us that it was probably our cousin Jessica or something. When we parked in our driveway, the car parked behind us, the engine still running. Our mom ordered us to stay in the car while she went to talk with our cousin. My sister and I watched from the rear window as my mom went to speak with her. After a few minutes, we heard the woman from the car yelling, gesturing to us inside the car, and then back to our mother. She peeled out of the driveway, almost running over my mother's feet. A few seconds later, my mom was crying hysterically and ordered us to get into the house. She pushed us into our room and spoke to our dad, even though we could hear everything. Apparently, the woman had thought we were insulting her while we were in the furniture store and threatened us. She had said that she would throw nails in our driveway and poison our dogs outside, and insisted that my mother beat us for talking to a complete stranger in such a way. And if she had the chance, she'd break our little necks if she heard us talking about her again. My dad wasn't very happy that my mom brought her all the way to the house, but stated it probably wasn't a big deal. The next day, my sister and I were walking to our bus stop when we saw the brown car parked across the street from our house. Sis immediately ran back inside to tell our dad, and he walked us to the bus stop and waited until we were safely on the bus. My mom wanted to do something about it, but my dad was against it. He assumed that the police wouldn't do anything since they were just threats. So the creepy stalkerish behavior continued without interference. She began showing up every morning, watching us as we waited for the bus, but she was coming onto our property to make her presence known. My mom found a bottle of antifreeze near the dog's fenced-in area. It hadn't been opened, but we were told to bring in their bowls every night just in case. Food wrappers and half-empty cups of soda were thrown on our lawn. The air valve caps and lug nuts on our tires went missing on our tires. One of our outside cats died, but we couldn't pinpoint what happened. Then my older brother did something really stupid. My dad was tired of walking us to the bus stop, so he asked my older brother to do it. Spotting the car in its typical spot, he decided the smart thing to do was throw up his middle finger at her. This messed her up. She ran out of her car, cursing and yelling at us. She said that we were crazy and needed to learn our place as children. She was screaming and threatening to beat us and spitting at us. I was crying my eyes out and my brother had to pick me up because I couldn't move. We stayed home that day and my mom finally called the police. We gave them her license plate number and they said they would visit her in a day or two. My mom didn't tell me much, but when they confronted her about it, she went on a total rant about how kids are just dirty bastards and she'd kill every last one she could. They didn't arrest her, but a few days later, the police called my mom to inform us that the lady was admitted to a psych ward. There were no more details, unless my mom didn't want to share them, but we never heard from her again. Somebody on Ask Reddit introduced me to this wonderful sub, and I have a wonderful tale of creepiness to share with you. I'm honestly such a grumpy tomboy. I never imagined that I would end up with a would-be stalker, especially not with the career I chose. I was a forensic death investigator. Forensic police officers that generally work with the DA's office and or the medical examiner's office that looks into cases of suspicious death. Occasionally, I'd run into people who had a passing interest in what I did because they'd seen CSI or Law & Order a few times. No big deal, right? Wrong. So very, very wrong. It started out with a homicide scene that I'd been called to at a crazy hour in the morning when Mr. Fanboy showed up. He was around his late 30s to early 40s, average height and modestly fit, chatting away with one of the poor unis, guarding the scene. Not a big deal. It happens because people are curious, but then he whips out a camera and snaps a few pictures. At that point, I figured he was a really nosy tone-deaf journalist and decided to give him a polite lecture on how inappropriate it was to take photos of crime scenes, especially when we were getting ready to move the deceased body. I deleted the pictures, sent him on his way, and figured that I would never see him again. But no, he pops up again a week later at another questionable scene. It doesn't click yet that something is seriously off until a week later, he shows up at another scene, this one being a complete county away from the last one. So I worked a major city in Texas through the medical examiner's office, so we took cases from several surrounding counties, a few thousand square miles. So it was odd that this guy would show up to a rather standard scene on the outer edge of our covered area, even if he was press. I mention it to some coworkers when I get the chance, and they've noticed him hanging around some of their scenes too. When he showed up again, me and a uniformed police officer shake him down to see who the heck he is and why he's got a major hard-on for rubbernecking crime scenes. I'm used to rubberneckers. You know, I get it. People are curious and sometimes a bit morbid when something happens nearby. Once the excitement and newness wears off, they usually go on about their business. Mr. Fanboy doesn't have a criminal record, like not even speeding or a parking ticket, so my superior had to talk with him. Basically explained that he was making everybody nervous and it looked really shady to just start hanging out at all the crime scenes. So he disappears for a couple of weeks before switching to a new tactic. If you can't hang around the crime scenes, why not hang around the investigators? But of course, only the female ones. The Fanboy shows up at one of my favorite dive bars that I frequent, because it was near my home, over 30 miles from where I work. Now, I'm a 5'7" woman who doesn't look imposing in the least. My coworkers used to tease that I looked like I was a kid playing dress up in my uniform. Like most women, I tried to be polite with the guy, who at the time was about 20 years my senior, but declined any offer of a drink. He doesn't take the hints and chats me up with some of the creepiest stuff I have ever heard. What's the worst crime scene you've investigated? Have you ever worked on a case where the victim was dismembered? And do you think rape and murder cases are really about power dynamics and not sexually motivated? So I'm creeped the heck out. Those are things I don't even want to talk about with a therapist, much less a dude who is giving me some seriously rapey, murdery vibes. I completely shut him down, not even trying to be polite, and he seemed a little put off but not apologetic in the least. I went home, put my service weapon back on, and called my supervisor to give them a heads up, and start a paper trail for an RO. He served with a cease and desist a few days later, and I figured that the threat of an RO and trouble with the police will deter him from escalating any further. Not even 24 hours after the cease and desist is delivered, he's back to shadowing crime scenes like it's going out of style. At another female investigator's scene, he gets into an altercation with one of the uniformed officers. He gets slammed with trespassing, obstruction, and a few other charges, but since he has no record, he's let out on bail, and shows up to a scene I'm working not 3 days later. We get into a scuffle after she breaks one of my guy's noses to get onto the scene. He's not as strong as he looks, but I still ended up with the black eye. He looked worse by the time my partner and I finally get him cuffed. An investigation is opened and turned up a police scanner and a lot of creepy journals in his car, as well as notes on where I lived and worked, along with info on one of the other female investigators. From what I heard through the grapevine, his mother's house, where he was living, was very creepy. Yeah, I never thought people would be that obsessed with crime scenes, forensics, or the like that they'd end up going to jail. But here we are. I'm also very aware that he probably had a lot of very unsavory things planned for me and or one of my coworkers, which still makes my skin crawl to this day. In my teens, I had my fair share of encounters with creepy old men, and after my last post here, I figured I'd post another encounter I had. This happened when I was 15, over a decade ago. Wow, I'm starting to feel old. I've told this particular story to friends for years, but I've never posted it online. There were a lot of long stretches of industrial area in the town I grew up in. Large plazas with big parking lots, stuck next to one another in wide open stretches of road and highway. The majority of my town felt like the area before an airport. Flat, gray, and functional. As a depressed teenager, I used to go out after school a lot by myself. First, it wasn't within my neighborhood, but it escalated to me leaving the quaint residential areas to walk an hour or two in any direction. I'd usually make my way home before dark, and I had a trusty flip phone at the time to call my parents if I needed to. Generally, I felt pretty safe walking on the main streets because of how populous they were. There were always plenty of cars on the road, and there were quite a few pedestrians out and about. One early summer evening at about dusk, I was making my way home from one of my walks. It was a route I'd taken a lot, and I was about a 40-minute walk from home. I was just passing a parking lot when a car pulled out in front of me. I stopped about 2 feet from the vehicle to let it turn onto the road, but the driver rolled down his window. "Hey, how are you?" he asked me. The man looked to be in his late 40s and greeted me with an unsettling enthusiasm. I wasn't sure how to respond, but since I couldn't pass his car, I hoped he just needed directions or something. I'm okay. How are you?" Before I could even finish my response, he says, "I love your style. Goth girls in boots are one of my fetishes," he said. And I am not paraphrasing. Now, as I said, I've been approached quite a few times by creepy men, but this guy was beyond bold. I had absolutely no idea how to respond. Just as I was going to try to formulate a response, a car pulled up behind him, meaning that he was blocking another car from exiting the parking lot. There's a car behind you trying to get out," I tell him, relieved that I now have a way to get out of this conversation. "I'll meet you in the next parking lot," he said. And as I try to tell him now that I need to get home, he drives off. In my mind, there was no way he could be serious. I continue walking, but sure enough, he's in the next parking lot. The parking lot he'd entered was down a bit of a hill, and he was standing beside his car. As soon as he saw me, he started waving me down. I'd been followed by cars before, and I was generally afraid of the idea of making a man angry and being stalked to my home. I assessed the situation. He was parked about 10 feet from a dive bar, and there were about 15 men outside on the patio, which meant that they could see me and would be in earshot if I screamed. I weighed the options between going down to meet them versus potentially being followed home and made the stupid decision to walk the slight incline. I honestly don't know why I didn't just pretend to be on the phone or call my mom. I don't remember what he said when I approached, but I kept my distance from him in his car so I wouldn't be easy to kidnap. He walked around to his trunk, and I felt myself tense up and take a step back. He then pulls out a pair of women's boots and approaches me slightly to show them to me. They were lace-up about mid-calf, maybe size 9. "Nice, aren't they?" he asks me. Yeah. I respond hesitantly. They were not nice, but my brain was on autopilot. So you want to try them on for me? He asked, smiling. I'm absolutely stunned. More than scared, I'm completely baffled that this is actually happening. Think I'm a little young for you, I managed to say. No, what, you're like 20, right? No, I'm 15. All the blood leaves his face, and he finally realizes that he's made a mistake. He quickly puts the boots back in his trunk and says something to the effect of, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you're just so hot. But I know I shouldn't be saying that." Kind of laugh him off and exit gracefully. He drives out of there well above the speed limit. I'm relieved but left absolutely bewildered and creeped out. Why was he carrying around a pair of women's boots? How many women did he approach? What the heck just happened? What would have happened if I were over 18? And why did his brain think that what he just did was okay even if I had been old enough? I still can't wrap my head around everything that happened, and I don't know if he thought that it would actually work even if I were an adult. I'm in my late 20s now, which means that if he approached me today, he probably would be more insistent. So creepy boots guy, let's never meet again. So this is long, but this girl has been messing with my life and harassing me for almost 2 years, and it just keeps escalating. About a year and a half ago, I moved from a small city to a major Midwest city, after I started dating my boyfriend Dean. I had grown up in the surrounding area and was super excited about finally getting to live in the city properly. I was still leasing an apartment in the old city and couldn't break the lease, so Dean let me crash at his place for most of the week while I tried to make freelance connections. One of the first places I visited was an art gallery that Dean's best friend was in the process of building. I cut my leg open on some old auto parts in the lot that they were cleaning out and developed a pretty bad infection, so while I was waiting for Dean and Emerson, the gallery owner, to pack up and drive me home, I started talking to lots of random artists who were passing through the worksite. Somewhere during this, I must have met Kate. I don't actually remember meeting her, but she tracked all of my social media accounts down and followed or friended me on all of them. Kate was a comic artist, she said, and was very opinionated about the direction the city was going and super confident about her work. I didn't know anyone else. Most of my college friends in the area hadn't returned home from internships, so I was really excited to have a female friend who was also an illustrator/comic artist. In the fall, when Dean left for a month, I house sat for him for a few days a week since I had 2 jobs, one in a new city and one in an old city, and I split my week between the 2 areas. To keep myself from getting stressed out, I started learning photography as a hobby and as a reason to get out of the house. Kate immediately commented on my status about it and requested to go along with me on one of my evening trips. The only issue is that I would have to pick her up in a fairly deserted part of town, by the old fairgrounds. Okay, I think. Weird, but I do really want to be friends with her and I don't like walking around alone. I drove to the fairgrounds and waited for about 45 minutes. No signs of Kate. I call and text her. Nothing. I get lost on the way back and I'm fuming mad and complain to Dean's housemate Lily. Lily takes me out for beers to vent about it and we end up becoming very close friends immediately. A couple weeks after this, right before Dean comes back to town, Lily and I get invited to Kate's art show. She makes a big deal about it, calls local newspapers, claims she's got a band and a sponsor deal. Not too crazy, since Emerson's gallery was hosting it. I figured she could have met friends to collab with, like Lily and I had. So we get dressed up and pregame a bit, and then head over. There's hardly any art up, and a couple people are uncomfortably walking around. Lily and I are getting a weird vibe, but Kate provided tons of liquor and free comic books, and her sponsor gave us free t-shirts. Score. We drink enough to mostly forget about Kate's weird attitude, and that she really only had one friend there, despite posts about a huge crowd. Later on, Kate likes all of my photos of the shirt and Lily wearing her shirt, and comments that we're super close friends, and that she was so glad we came. I hadn't actually remembered meeting Kate in person prior to this, and I know Lily hadn't, so that made us kind of uncomfortable. When Dean comes back, he comments on how close Kate and I seemed on Facebook. I laugh a little bit uncomfortably and say we've never really hung out. He brushes it off, and I do as well. In November, Kate frantically calls me, Dean and Emerson, asking for a place to sleep. She tells us that her roommate is being abusive and the cops won't come, and that she needs a place to crash, as she fears for her life. I'm super freaked out and offer to pick her up. She doesn't answer, so Emerson and I assume the worst and jump in my car. Right as we start driving, she calls us and announces that she's fine. A-okay. It's no big deal. Also, Emerson, I'm at your art space. Can I crash for a bit? She immediately gets a pizza on Emerson's tab and starts laughing and decides to host an impromptu party at the gallery, all the while claiming it was fine, but she had to go. In retrospect, this should have been the first red flag, but I wasn't about to claim someone's abuse story wasn't true. It did make me really suspicious, though, that it became okay with no repercussions. No issues with picking up her stuff, that turned out totally fine. The whole thing was solved by a pizza. Over the next couple of months, Kate starts going on crusades against random organizations that she's been involved with. Most of her criticism involves that they were somehow abusing or bullying her. I get fed up with it pretty quickly, especially when one of her prime complaints is, Incubator. Try to advertise my services and get me freelance clients. Like last time I checked, that was kind of a good thing. Over the winter, I had a bit of a mental breakdown and didn't see Kate around town as often. It was a struggle to not be snappy with her, as I was feeling pretty negatively towards most people, and I couldn't deal with her conspiracy theories and false drama. Plus, she would always bring me pieces of art and seek out my approval, then scream at me every time I said something even vaguely critical at all. I just couldn't deal with that. In March, Dean took me out to see a show during a local bar and restaurant week, and several of our friends were rapping on stage during it. Emerson, a friend from out of town, Dean and I were hanging out with the bartender, another friend of ours, and we saw Kate arrive. All of us were wearing cocktail or club attire, but Kate was wearing a ratty sweatshirt and sweatpants, hadn't combed her hair. She's usually a casual dresser, but this came across pretty strongly as something is off, since she always made an effort to do her hair and put on jewelry with hoodies. She dragged my friend from out of town and the girl he was flirting with over to the other side of the bar and announced that I may have a sketchbook with me, but she is the real artist and he ought to hear about her comic. Now, not to be petty, but if we're going to compare work, her comic was really bad. My depression was affecting my ability to do good work, and even in comparison, hers was really bad. Like mediocre DeviantArt. No backgrounds, no plot, half the main people are vampires and hot guys, all drawn with her boyfriend's face. Yeah, I should note also that at the time of this I was 23 and assumed she was as well. I was annoyed but wanted to enjoy my night, so I shut up for a bit and listened. Then Emerson leaned over and, as we watched her down shots like a college freshman, he said, "Can you believe Kate is 33? She acts like a kid." What? So now my alarm bells were going off slightly. Like, why is Kate seeking out only people who are 10 years younger than her? And I looked closely and realized she physically looked her age, but being slightly heavier, she was intentionally playing up a slight baby face with hoodie, a ponytail, and minimal makeup. Kate then came over and spent most of the night rambling conspiracy theories at me, and insisted she could sense that the guys on stage were going to be involved in some kind of shootout. She was sure of it, and kept whispering into my face way too closely. Dean and I went to a diner afterwards and found that Kate had convinced the rap person Emerson to follow us, but eat at a separate table. She came over to my area and stage whispered, "It's okay. I think that because I'm with them, I've managed to save them from what fate wanted." Wow, we noped out of there so fast. It was really hard to avoid Kate entirely after that, even though I wanted to. She managed to show up the day Dean asked me to move in with him, but offered to help us paint our workspace, so we had to drive her home and listen to her theories about fate and horror movies and plots for her vampire comic the whole way back. We didn't end up celebrating because the mood was pretty well killed. On Facebook, she got increasingly unhinged. She'd latch on to any comment I or somebody else made that she could decide was negative and triggering for her. This would include anything from not liking her status to saying we didn't agree with the countdown of top coffee shops in the city. She'd then rant passive-aggressively on Twitter about whoever said it for hours. It started extending to her business, too. She accused one guy of blackmailing her and stealing her rent, when he'd actually paid her the full amount for art in advance and was simply asking when it would be delivered by. She had an art show at a coffee house, but didn't even stay for 30 minutes of it, and stormed out in a screaming tantrum because they decided to provide her with musicians for her show and serve coffee during it. She then called one of the local newspapers, claiming that they had severely wronged her and ruined her show. I think you get the picture. So, I've been pretty much trying to ignore her for the last year, but she keeps escalating her behavior. She's lately taken to telling Dean that I'm evil and isn't subtle about it. In October, she crashed a housewarming party that our coworkers were holding and started drunkenly yelling about how Dean should dump me for one of our colleagues. She also regularly stalks me on Twitter and Instagram and tweets about my evil activities without using names. But then as soon as I tell her to stop, she tells everyone openly that I'm an asshole and is ruining her life by bullying her. Somehow. Annoying, but boring to be totally honest. Most recently though, she started targeting my boss at an activist blog I work part-time for. I do a lot of design with mental health advocacy and queer issues, so I'm pretty visible to anyone trying to find me online. And one of my side duties for the blog is to find trans and queer media for my boss, Aiden, to check out, in case they make a good article. I noticed that Kate had published a comic that looks really good that was about trans characters and Afrofuturist themes. I was a little nervous about sending it over because Kate, but I figured it was unlikely that Kate would be angry about a positive review. Aiden was a bit concerned, as a queer trans writer, that this was being written by a cisgender author, so he asked her some friendly questions about plot summary and her sources for information about the community. Pretty standard book review stuff. Kate blew up, ranted at him via Twitter and called him racist for asking her about the comic. And it got to a harassment level where Aiden had to block her and shut down most of his non-work social media accounts for a while. She then signed into her professional account and pretended to be a spokesperson for her comic group and called him racist again, and said that he was harassing and bullying her, despite him not being actually online for most of the day. It's been about 3 days. So far she's called his primary employer to try to get him fired for being a racist bully, which is not true at all, hunted down all of his Reddit, Tumblr, and even Amazon accounts, and has been arbitrarily messaging Redditors and random activists she finds online to tell them how horrible Aiden is. At the moment, he's not interested in calling the cops, but she escalated it today for me, where I might be. She found mine and Dean's address via a Facebook event, and has been telling random users on Twitter that I masterminded Aiden's campaign of harassment and giving them my email and other info for doxing purposes. Luckily, so far, nobody's really taken the bait, but I did get a lot of new followers on my art accounts who are all quote-unquote friends of hers. For all I know, they're also her. Aiden and I also have gotten a lot of emails sent to our blog's address, saying how much the art and banners suck and that I don't deserve to be working for it. I don't know that she's done anything with the address, but it scares me that she knows it. She likes Dean and my dog still, for some reason, but I'm scared that she'll try and steal my dog or break into our house, now that she knows where I live. She has the mentality that I don't deserve nice things like my dog or my career accomplishments as much as she does, which really creeps me out. So yeah, advice is welcome, but mostly I just had to get this off my chest. So this happened a few months ago, right when I was just married to my husband. I know it wasn't a product of wedding stress since people around me had been as freaked out as I was. My mother-in-law and I were out of town shopping and we stopped at the local Walmart on our way home. She had gone to look at air conditioning units and so I went to browse the book section. I just found something that caught my interest when I heard somebody say, "Jessica." I was in one of those, "Oh, there you are," tones of voices, like it was both a pleasure and a relief. Jessica isn't my name, but I look up anyway since it was loud and basically right next to me. Standing a few feet away, her shopping cart between her and me, was a thin woman, maybe late 40s, long brown hair and clothes, nicer than what you would expect to see on somebody who frequented Walmart. Her shopping cart was empty. She stood looking directly at me with a huge manic teeth-revealing grin, eyes bright. Because she's looking directly at me and there's no one else in the aisle, I feel obliged to talk to her. I smile because she's smiling and tell her she's made a mistake. My name's not Jessica. There you are, sweetie. I was so worried about you. The woman continues and wheels up to me with my exuberance, making me shrink back because I can already smell the crazy. A few people are passing our aisle at this time, and the woman's overly exaggerated tone gets their attention. Some heads snap to look at us, but nobody stops. The woman, very warmly, as if I was her daughter, caresses my arm. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Honey, let's go. Your dad has been waiting." I am a person who is anxious to please other people, so I'd already taken a step forward when she gently pressed my back so I would walk. Then my brain asked, "What the heck are you doing?" And I did a little scuttle forward. "Jessica, honey, stop playing around, let's go." The woman had never yet lost her crazy smile. This time she grabbed my arm like a vice and started to pull. I pulled my arm back, setting in my heels and putting my body into motion. I tell her to leave me the heck alone or I'm going to find my husband. My husband isn't there, but she doesn't know this. The woman freezes and her face twitches. "Dirty little bitch," she hisses, and wheels off down the aisle. "You're ungrateful." I hear her shoot over her shoulder. Then when she reaches the end, "Okay, bye pumpkin. See you for dinner." I wait and watch her turn the corner and disappear, and then go to the opposite way. I manage to find my mother-in-law and tell her what happened. She's a little disconcerted, but makes light of it, trying to make me feel better. When we are in the checkout line, I'm scanning around nervously, trying to see if she's anywhere near us. I spot her several checkouts down, and she spotted me. She's still got her weird smile on, and she's wandering away with her empty shopping cart. She has a hot beverage in one hand, which she drops and spills on the ground. She never stopped to even look at it. She just breezed out of the store. One of the employees watched her do this and leave, but never said anything to her. In fact, the expression on the employee's face made it seem like she was a little bit afraid. I have luckily never seen her again, and hopefully never will. Hey everyone, so I'm a guy from the UK. I live in a town in Wales, albeit not the little villages most people imagine. My town is a popular holiday destination along the coast of Wales. This isn't overly relevant to the story, but I just thought I would give everybody some context. I did actually post this story on a separate Reddit account several years ago in a different subreddit. However, I highly exaggerated it for the sake of the story, and this was a creative writing subreddit, I believe. I can't fully remember. I just remember the story I told wasn't 100% honest. So if you think you've read something similar before, then you probably have. But this is the full truth of what happened and is likely way less exciting than the original story, but oh well. So it started when I was around 15 years old, about 8 years ago. I was dating a girl from about 2 towns over. I would usually get the train to hers and back. However, this one night her family weren't supposed to be home, and we were kind of being watched by her brother, who was about 19 or 20 and was overall pretty chill. The plan was to stay the night. We were up late playing on the Wii, but her parents unexpectedly came home. I never got along with her mom, and the whole thing got kind of heated, and I was kicked out of the house and told I couldn't stay over. It was about 2 a.m. and I didn't want to call my own parents and worry of waking them up. My mom is a very strict woman, so I began the long trudge home. It was roughly about an hour and a quarter worth of walking, so I was expecting to be home around 3:30. So I walked along the weird concrete bit just above the beach, not sure if what that's called, and I stopped about half an hour of walking as There is a public toilet which is kind of run down, but also open 24 hours, and I was desperate. I was expecting it to be empty or just have a homeless dude sleeping in it, but I was wrong. There was this guy using the urinal. He looked to be in his mid to late 50s, I think. A little on the overweight side, but not extremely. He had gray, messy-ish hair, but other than that, he looked pretty normal. He definitely didn't look homeless. I remember he made a quick joke about something I don't remember. I politely laughed and did my business and left. After about another 15 minutes of walking, the weather had gotten pretty bad. It started to rain heavily and the wind was picking up. I seem to remember this was around November time, so it was pretty cold. Anyways, I'm walking and a car drives by, beeps and pulls over just in front of me. I had assumed it was someone I know but couldn't think who. Got to the car and the dude from the toilet was inside. He asked me where I was headed and I told him. He said that was a long walk and I couldn't be expected to walk all that way in this weather, and he offered me a lift. In hindsight, I probably should have refused, but the weather was very bad, and at the time he wasn't giving me any weird vibes. The drive took like 15 minutes, I think. The more I was in the car with him, the more I started to get vibes that there was something off about him. He was telling me his best friend was a 14-year-old lad who stays over at his place a lot, and they drink together, and if I ever wanted to join, I was welcome to. He was asking me some really invasive questions as well. I don't fully remember what they were. I just remember it's not the kind of questions you ask someone that you are giving a simple lift home to. Anyways, we got to the street around the corner from my place, and I asked him to just drop me off there. I said that my house wasn't accessible by road and that I would walk the rest of the way. He gave me his number and told me to ring him when I got back to my house safely, as he wanted to make sure I was okay. I asked him what his name was, as at this point he knew my full name, and he just said Pete. My phone wants a surname. He wouldn't tell me. Just kept saying, just call me Pete. I later found out that Pete was a fake name too. Anyways, I got into my house and texted him just to let him know I was safe. Probably a bad decision, but back then I was full of bad decisions, to be honest. The next day came and I was expecting everything to be normal. It didn't, because I stupidly gave Pete my number when I texted him. I started to get texts from him every morning, basically just saying good morning to me and wishing me well. I replied to the first few and then started ignoring them. He then started trying to ring me every single evening. I would ignore most of his calls, but he would often repeatedly ring until I would answer. He was sending me these texts inviting me over to his house for some drinks. He kept telling me he just gotten himself a pool table and wanted me to come and play it with him. He was telling me a story of a friend that he was playing pool with, the 14-year-old I was talking about, and accidentally let it slip that the guy called him John. I confronted him about this and said, I thought your name was Pete. He said, oh no, my friend's name is John. I said, you just said your friend called you John, and you told me your friend was called Tom. He said, oh well, some people call me John. It's like a nickname, but his name is John too. He hesitated saying this, and I kind of clicked that he was telling me a bunch of lies. I kept refusing, but he kept asking. After a while, my mom wanted to know who this dude who kept texting me and ringing me was. I told her, and she rang him herself from her phone and told him that if he ever carried on texting me and ringing me, she would be calling the police. I didn't get any more texts from him after that, but it didn't end there. I had a routine, you see, and he knew this. I always walked my dog at 4:30 every afternoon and played with her for 40 minutes on the field at the end of my street, just near where he had dropped me off. I started to notice his car pulling up there within 5 minutes of me getting there with my dog. He had tinted windows, but I would always notice the car lights were always left on, and the engine was always running. Also, I recognized his car. I would occasionally notice the car door open in a large flash from that direction, as if somebody was taking pictures. I started changing the time I walked my dog, but he would eventually figure it out and start showing up either or late to coincide with when I was walking her. This went on for months and I never mentioned it to anyone, but one day it just stopped. He stopped pulling up at the side of the field. Never saw his car anymore. Not text messages or phone calls from him. It all just stopped. I ended up getting a new phone after about a year and had that for another 2 years. I dug out my old phone when I was around 18 to 19 after the aforementioned dog died. I had some old pictures and videos of her on that phone and wanted to transfer them over to my PC so that I always had them. I turned on a phone which had been turned off for several years now and still had the old SIM in it. That's when I got my final message from Pete. It was an odd one, and it was about 14 months old. It said something along the lines of, "Hi, I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I just thought you should know that over the new year I was diagnosed with an illness and I've been told I don't have long left to live. You were a good friend in the short time we knew each other. I live at," sent me his address, "and would really appreciate it if you could come around just so I can have a last chat with you. Got some beers in, and if it gets too late you can stay the night. Just drop me a phone call when you want to come around so I can get everything ready for you. See you soon." No idea if Pete or John was genuinely ill or just trying to lure me to his house. Never been to the address he sent me and never responded to him or heard from him since. I didn't reply to him, and that was the last I heard from the guy. So yeah, that's the story. Not tremendously exciting, but kind of had a big impact on me during those years. Hope you all enjoyed. In the spirit of Halloween, I will share an incident that happened to me last October. It was 10 a.m. on a weekday, and I had the day off, so I decided to go to the grocery store and get some pumpkins to carve. I did my shopping with no problems and didn't notice anything off since it was earlier in the day and the other shoppers were elderly. I bought 3 large pumpkins and had them in a cart to put in the trunk of my car. As I was putting the first pumpkin in my trunk, holding it with one arm, opening the trunk with the other, and my back to the parking lot, I feel somebody pulling the pumpkin out of my arm backwards. I spun around and threw that pumpkin in the process to see 2 men directly behind me. I'm a very small girl, so I immediately felt endangered. The one man, who I assumed was the man who first grabbed at me, made an attempt to scream at me in a language I didn't understand and grab at me again. I pushed the cart with the remaining pumpkins at the 2 men and got in my car to lock the doors and drive away. The 2 men got into a white brand new Dodge Charger with temp plates and sped out of the parking lot after me. The street we both pulled out on was a busy 4-lane, 25-mile-per-hour business district. You can't safely speed. That didn't matter to the Dodge Charger, who weaved in and out of traffic to try and run me off the road. The driving was so erratic that another driver attempted to box the Charger in. Didn't matter much. They went into incoming traffic anyway. Meanwhile, I threw my left turn signal on and made a quick right into a coffee and donut chain I regularly frequent. Next to this coffee chain is a pizza chain, not yet open. I noticed that the Charger had pulled into this pizza chain and was waiting for me to pull out the coffee chain parking lot. I frantically told the employee what was going on through the drive-thru while I ordered a snack. I mean, I was there and didn't want to pull out yet. This coffee chain knows me well, and on this day, the manager went above and beyond the call of duty. She called the police, who told her to have me pull around to the window. She did, knowing I would be in full view of the Charger, so she came outside to stand between us with the biggest rolling pin I've ever seen in my life. She stared those men down like my own mother would have. The cops came and took statements. The Charger was still there and searched. One officer told me they pulled tarp and rope from the trunk and are treating this as a trafficking attempt. Both men refused to answer any questions and were arrested. I don't know for sure what their intent was, but I live in a sanctuary city with mostly people from Nepal or Bhutan, and I have never had a scary issue. I love my neighborhood, but I did not recognize these men or their car frequenting the neighborhood. That day, I bought everybody working at that coffee chain a gift certificate for a massage as a thank you for protecting me, and I still tip them every morning extra a year later. For some background, when I was around 16 or 17, I worked at a local Tim Hortons store for some extra cash. Nothing too unordinary, just a lot of old folks coming to get their coffee and morning office runs. It wasn't until I started covering midnights for people on the weekends when a strange man started appearing randomly. It started with him picking up money from the drive-thru lane, which is by law illegal. He was talked to and stopped picking up the change, but at night in the drive-thru cameras, there was always two pinpricks of whitish-greenish lights coming from the garden and whispers in our headsets that none of us would admit to. I always thought it was my coworkers playing tricks on me. I mean, we had a lot of jokesters. The whispers would say things like, "I will skin your bones," and "You will enjoy your last bagel." I always got a bagel on break. It made me shiver at the thought somebody was always watching, but again, it was most likely my coworkers. The man became bolder, and he started ordering weird things like a biscuit not toasted with butter. But then he wanted it toasted and soaked in coffee. One night he came in with blood on his shirt, and when we asked him if he needed first aid or an ambulance, he just said that he needed to pee and that he was fine. My supervisor called the police right away as she came in from changing the outside garbages and was bawling her eyes out. She asked me as the phone rang if anyone had come inside, and I said, "Yes, a man. He went to the washroom, but I think he's hurt." She screamed as she realized it wasn't his blood. She told the operator, "I was changing the outside garbages when I saw a man laying on the sidewalk. He was caked in blood and not breathing. I think the killer is in the bathroom." The police department was no longer than 5 minutes away, and they dragged the man out of the washroom. He was completely naked and trying to touch himself with the blood of the man he killed. I threw up when he started to get very aroused and orgasm. The store was closed after that, and from what I know, it wasn't an aggravated killing. And even worse, I don't think it hit the news. I'm not sure why these things never hit mainstream news, but I feel like it's the company covering it up. When I was a teenager, probably 16 and male, I took a female friend and went to a nearby big city to see Panic at the Disco in concert. This was their pretty odd era, and Ryan Ross were still in the same band. I was super excited, but the concert was far enough that we didn't want to drive back that night, so we got a hotel room. My grandparents drove us, so we had our own hotel room. My grandparents next door. When my grandpa picked us up after the concert, we decided that we weren't ready for bed. Still high from the concert and also sore from all of our dancing and tireless attempts to start mosh pits at the show. We went out to where the front desk was, and there was a man at the desk, not super old but old enough to think of us as kids. We manipulated him into letting us into the pool after hours, telling him that we were sore from the show and sweaty too. He told us to be quiet and not make a big mess in there, and we agreed. It was fine. We decided, however, to see if we could get him to give us some food. Took us to the kitchen, but other than fruit, there was nothing that didn't need to be cooked, so he goes, "Well, if you don't tell anyone, I'll go get you a steak and shake." And we agreed enthusiastically. So he leaves, and he's gone for a little while, and this is where it gets weird. When he comes back, he has a huge bottle of whiskey with him. He invites us, 2 minors, back to drink and eat in the office with him, so us being dumb kids, we accept. He proceeds to show us on the office computer his MySpace profile, where his name is something like Timmysaurus Rex, and he's like 31 years old. Kind of weird alone, but it gets weirder. He wants to add us, and we lie and say we don't use MySpace because, what the heck, we don't want to be friends with somebody almost twice our age. And he's like, "Oh, okay." So I'm getting weird vibes at this point and don't drink much, and once we've both had some alcohol, he tells me and my friend it would be cool if we took our pants off and copied our butts in the copier machine because it would be funny. And I'm like, nah. But my friend stupidly does it. So we're still hanging with him, both not knowing that the other was only doing it because they didn't want to awkwardly leave. So at some point I leave, for some reason, at which point I wouldn't find out until later. He kissed my friend, and she obviously pulled away and left and didn't let it go any further. Then I came back and wasn't sure where she went, so I asked Timmy if he'd help me find her, and she was like, "Sure, I have to put bills on the doors." So he was going room to room and putting the bills on the doors when he suddenly backed me. An inexperienced and also ugly, awkward boy against the wall and kissed me really greedily, like with lots of super wet tongue. I pulled away super awkwardly and kind of awkwardly said he tasted like alcohol, and he laughed. So eventually we find my friend and I grab her and pull her away from him and tell him that we'll wait for him in the front. When I tell her he kissed me once we were away from him, and she was like, what the heck, same. So we were both super creeped out at this point and decided to sneak back to our room before he gets back to us, and just kind of sat there for a while thinking like, okay, that was weird. How about we don't tell anyone? Thankfully, when we woke up to check out, somebody else was working the front desk. We left and I didn't tell any adults until years later. Thrifting is my favorite hobby, if you can call it that. It's something I like to do alone when I get the time, as it's a chance for my brain to shut off and just let go as I scan aisles crammed with random things for hours. Note, I'm a 5'5" former elementary teacher. I'm about as intimidating as a wet sock, and I'm pretty quiet and stay to myself in public. I had decided to go out of my way to a store I hadn't been to before and follow my usual routine. When I'm in a store, it's just me and the items. I don't pay any mind to anyone around me, as the stores are crowded and I'm really only there to do my own thing. So imagine my surprise when an older woman turned to me and said in a huff, "Can I help you?" I turned and looked around me to make sure I was who she was talking to. I just shook my head no, making a confused expression, and went back to looking at shoes. Things were okay for a minute before I heard her in the next aisle talking to her friend. "This creepy woman is following me. Every time I look up, she's there." There is only so much space in the store. I usually go along the edges and then make my way to the center of the store, so there is a good chance she probably just saw me doing my thing. I tried to avoid her until I realized she started talking to random people around me about how creepy I was and how I was stalking her. People started giving me funny looks, but paid no mind once they realized how harmless and shrimpy I look. Her? Really?" someone said. "Yeah, and I'm gonna mess her up if I see her again." She began making more and more aggressive comments, and I decided I had enough. I've never fought anyone in my life, and I really wasn't planning to that day. I left my items and went to my car. Yeah, something was up with her, and I wasn't sticking around to find out what it was. To the actual creepy lady in the thrift store, let's not meet again. I was friends with two people, Tammy and Aaron. Well, more so friends with Aaron than Tammy, but we'll get into that. This story is primarily about Tammy. I met Aaron in my freshman year of college, and we quickly became best friends. Soon, Aaron began dating Tammy, and they were basically inseparable. As such, due to proximity, I was forced to be friends, or at least friendly, with Tammy. Whenever I'd hang out with Aaron, 9 times out of 10, Tammy would be there too. Tammy and I had a few common interests: video games, certain board and card games, so I decided to give her a shot. However, I quickly found Tammy to be insufferable. She was rude, narcissistic, and had a hair-trigger temper. Everybody I will talk to about Tammy would say the same. Despite this, I had to remain friendly with her whenever she was around. In her mind, this made us best friends, though for me, it was more of an appeasement. I feel like she latched onto me because I was one of the few people who was willing to tolerate her. As you can imagine, she had very little in the way of friends. Fast forward to 4 years later, Tammy and Aaron are still dating and now living together. It's an extremely toxic relationship. Tammy would scream at Aaron daily over small things, making them terrified to make any mistakes in front of Tammy. Aaron felt trapped in the relationship. I was doing everything I could to convince them to leave, no matter the potential costs. Thankfully, Aaron eventually stood up for themselves and ended up breaking up with Tammy last November. However, Tammy still wanted to keep her perceived friendship with me. Part of me felt bad for her. I unfortunately can be a bit of a bleeding heart, so I humored her but did my best to keep her at arm's length. She gave me an unsolicited gift for Christmas, a deck of Magic the Gathering cards. We played that a decent amount of times together. However, I already owned this deck but did not have the heart to tell her that. Instead, I politely thanked her and took the cards. Later, I quietly regifted the cards to my real best friend. This will be important later. Fast forward to my birthday, which was recently, not going to give the exact date, Tammy gave me yet another unsolicited gift. This time it was homemade weed cookies. I am a stoner, but I have a notoriously low edible tolerance compared to my weed tolerance. Such even low doses of edibles like 5 milligrams THC tend to be too intense for me, and I usually just stick to smoking bud. She claimed that the cookies were dosed at 20 milligrams THC a cookie. I was ready to eat these, but decided, what the heck, and ate 1/4 of a cookie. That's right, 1/4. Despite that tiny amount, about 45 minutes later, I began to feel abnormally high. The room began spinning for me. This tends to happen for me when I smoke too much at once. I have a rug in my living room and it has a particular zigzag pattern. It began to move beneath me in an unnerving and nauseating pattern. I've done a few mushroom trips in my day and age and this felt very similar. However, I have never experienced anything close to this with weed. Then my heart began beating extremely fast to the point where I genuinely felt like I was having a heart attack. No matter how many breathing exercises I did, I could not get it to calm down. Finally, I felt extremely nauseous, probably from seeing the room spinning, and I ran to the bathroom and stayed there for about an hour in front of the toilet. I gagged and dry heaved several times, but nothing ended up coming out. Approximately 4 hours later, I began to feel normal again and was able to get some sleep. The next day, I felt like I had a hangover, akin to taking 10 shots the previous night. I confronted her about my bad experience the previous night, and I kid you not. She simply said, "Oh, oopsies, it was actually more like 80 to 90 milligrams per cookie." It took everything in my power to not slap her over that. I calmly expressed that I no longer wished to continue our sham of a friendship and promptly blocked her on all platforms. I have not since spoken to her, and it is definitely for the best. Come to find out a few days later that my best friend had casually mentioned the regifting to Tammy a few days after before she made the cookies. As such, while I have no definitive proof, I am inclined to believe she took this personally and made the cookies as a form of revenge against me. I'm glad I only ate 1/4. Dear people of Reddit, do I have a story for you? I will start by saying though my story is not long, it is very scary considering it could have gone much worse than it did. This happened just last night in a place my kids, my wife, and I just moved into a week and a half ago. It's a small place in a rough area, but I grew up in this area and it was affordable. So on Friday, my sister-in-law has a son who was going to be in the hospital the entire weekend getting surgery. My wife and I volunteer to watch the newborn daughter. So Saturday, my niece is sleeping all day, which brings me to Saturday night. She wakes up right before sunset, is nonstop crying. My wife and I guess she misses her mom, but we can't really do anything about that. Mom is in the hospital. In order to give my wife some peace, I go to the living room to chill with the crying baby. I am rocking her back and forth, giving her a pacifier, and her spitting it out. Good times. What happens next is so perfect that I'm glad it happened the way it did. My daughter, 10 years old, comes out the kids' room and says, "Daddy, if you're tired, I can watch the baby." I was going to refuse, but my wife shouted from the room that she should do it. So in my head, I'm like, why not take a quick break before they all got to go to bed? At first, I thought I'd lay in bed with my wife, but she was watching an action movie. Taken. I wanted some quiet time after a long day. I tell her I'm going to look through my work bag in the living room for a few minutes, and I work as an armed guard, so I check that. Badge, name tag, all my permits and paperwork are in the right place, and that nothing is missing. Then I see a flash of light through my window. I look out the window and I see nothing. I noticed a helicopter flying around, so I think the light was the helicopter. I sit back down and look at my lockbox and decide, One quick look at my gun won't hurt, if it's unloaded anyways. Well, of course, as I'm pulling it out, my daughter comes out of the room. She was going to ask if we fed the baby when she paused. I hastily shoving my gun back in the lockbox so she wouldn't see it, didn't hear anything. So I asked, "Sorry, what did you say?" When she is still frozen staring at the door. I asked what was wrong and she said, "Somebody knocked on the door real hard." So I brush it off as maybe her imagination or the helicopter, when a booming crash comes from the door and it bursts open. It felt like an hour passed as my daughter and I stared at the empty black doorway. My son, 8 years old, comes out of his room to ask what happened. I regained my composure and shouted for my kids to run in my room with my wife and to lock the door. And I loaded my handgun, grabbed my flashlight. So I checked my door and I was still able to lock it. I check around the entire perimeter of the house and I find nothing. So whoever tried to break into my house when I was obviously home, that's not me, because I am waiting for you. I went to this primary school from 2006 to 2008. I was 12 when this happened and my sisters were 10. The school was horrible. Teachers would swear and throw things at you, and the principal did nothing about them. After school, I would either be in chess club or working in the library. Yes, I was a nerd that had bad grades, and after school, our chess teacher would give my sisters and I a lift home. A few weeks after he started giving us a lift home, we noticed a combi was following us. I remember it clearly. It was white with curtains on the windows. So, we, my sisters and I, circled around the block to ensure that we were being followed, and we were. Totally freaked out, we went to our neighbor's house and they let us in, and the neighbor's husband stood outside with a bat in his hands. When our parents got home, they contacted the school and the police. The next 2 weeks, we had to work with the police and they apparently found the guy. I overheard the police saying that the man must have had a partner. That statement stuck to me. I refused lifts from any male teachers and male friends of our parents, so we walked home from then on, but with a group. Fast forward a little while, I was 15 and my sisters were 13. My sisters and I are now in high school. We decided to go visit the primary school. As we got there, we bumped into one of the students we knew and he told us the chess teacher got arrested. I asked him for what, and what he said next sent a chill down my spine. He told us that the teacher got arrested for attacking children. He got caught when he tried to put an 11-year-old girl in his club room and she screamed for help. To think he gave us a lift home and had some equipment in the boot of the car. I contacted the cop who dealt with the Combi case and asked him about the teacher. It turned out the teacher told the Combi guy about us and was planning to take one of us if we hadn't gone to our neighbor. Please guys, have your kids vigilant at all times. Set something up with a neighbor in case your kids are in trouble and they need to get away and you're not around. Stay safe. Okay, so around 9 or 10 years ago, I was living with my mom, dad, and older sister in an old-ish house in a very small village. When I say small, I mean its only main feature was a small church and a few scattered houses occupied mostly by very old people. All the time, it was the summer, so I wasn't at school or anything, and since we were so far in the middle of nowhere, I spent most of that time at home, glued to one screen or another. The usual routine was I'd wake up at around 10 or 11. By this point, mom, dad, and sister had all left for work, so I had the house to myself. I'd go downstairs, make some toast, watch some random stuff on TV for an hour, before heading back to my room to continue with whatever game I was grinding through that particular day. The usual habits of a 17-year-old guy cut off from the world by many fields. I should give a quick rundown of our house. It was an older cottage with 2 rooms upstairs, mine and my sister's, and everything else was downstairs. As you walk up the stairs, you got to a very small landing and could go either left to my room or immediately right to my sister's room. Basically, the way this was laid out was that I could sit in my room with the door open and my sister's room is directly opposite. I should also mention that the ceilings in both of our bedrooms were slanted. We were basically in a large attic where the roof slanted down. Because of where the slant met the wall, we had crawl space that ran the length of the house on either side of the rooms, both with a small door to access them. These were mostly used for storing normal attic stuff, like Christmas decorations and old forgotten toys. The doors to these were thin little things, about 4 feet tall, with a small handle on the outside. This is important because turning these tiny doorknobs opened them, but only from the outside. If the door was pushed shut with you inside, there was no way back out. I discovered this myself on more than one occasion. The door on my side ran along my room and along one wall in my sister's room, and hers ran along the other side along my room. This space was not very big. You had to crouch to stand in it, and most of the time you were in there, you had to be crawling on your hands and knees. Anyways, this one morning I'm awakened to a familiar noise. Some sort of small creature rustling around in the crawl space on my sister's side. I could hear this because my bed was against the wall that ran along it. Not an unusual noise. Living in the countryside, we had mice almost constantly and pretty much had the run of the storage spaces, so no matter how many traps were put down. Thought nothing of it and got up and went off to begin my morning ritual of toast and television. The first odd thing I noticed was, while watching TV, I could hear movement upstairs. My sister's room was directly above the living room, so I assumed she'd just not gone to work that day for whatever reason and continued munching. Around an hour or two later, I went back upstairs and booted my PC. As I was waiting, I turned around to my open door and faced my sister's closed one and realized it was late in the day and she had yet to leave her room. An odd thing, since she normally parked up on the sofa in the living room on her days off and didn't move until our parents returned. We're not the most active family. I started to think that maybe she was at work and I'd imagined the noise from upstairs, but as I mused this, I noticed the crack of light at the bottom of her door as a shadow passed by it. Okay, so there's definitely somebody in there, so it must be her, right? I once again pushed it from my mind and went back to my PC. More time passed and the thought came back to me. Why would she be at home but not leave? She only has a small TV in her room and no books, so what she had been doing in there all day? I glanced back around and again saw a shadow under the door. She was still moving around in there, so what was up? I finally decided to go knock on her door. I knocked a few times and said her name. No answer. Weird, but maybe she had headphones or something on. I knocked a bit harder again and said her name again, but louder. No answer. Alright, I thought. Screw it. I'm just gonna go in, so I cracked the door open and peered around. I found an empty room. Nobody inside at all. Feeling slightly confused, but better that it was just my imagination, I stepped in properly and looked around and saw something that made me full on panic. Near the bottom of her little door leading to the crawl space, there was a small hole that the mice had made to get in and out of the bottom. Really small, but just big enough to fit half of your hand through. There, coming through that hole, were 4 fingers, holding the door shut from the inside. At first I thought, no, it can't be fingers. Don't be stupid. Until I watched them slowly creep back through the hole, into the crawl space. I lost my cool. Very quietly though, I might add. I backed out of the room, shutting the door behind me, and ran to my room. Being the stupid teenager that I was, I grabbed what might be the most imposing weapon I could find. The fake Winchester rifle cap gun I got from Disneyland a few years previous. I figured that if whoever was hiding in that bedroom didn't believe it was a real firearm, I could at least hit them with it. I ran off downstairs to where my dogs were on the far side of the house and called my mom, who worked about a 5-minute drive from our house. She told me to stay put and that her and her manager were on their way. In this time, I made a small upgrade from fake plastic rifle to one of my dad's golf clubs. I felt much better with that. Finally, my mom and her boss, John, turn up and I tell them everything leading up to this point. They say okay, and we all set off upstairs to investigate. Me, rather unheroically, bringing up the rear with my golf club. I get into my sister's room and I point to the door. I'll never know if my mom is just hard as nails or massively stupid, but while John and I watch, she marches over to the door, yanks it open, and sticks her head in. A moment passes while she looks left and right, and John and I are preparing to yank her back from the clutches of the psycho hobo, murderer hiding in there, before she shouts, "Chris, what the heck are you doing in there? Get out." Small amount of backstory. Chris was my sister's boyfriend. Unbeknownst to me, the night before, my dad had asked Chris to leave as he had stayed with us for around 5 days at this point. He said, "Yep, that's cool," and as far as mom and dad knew, he'd headed home. What really happened was, instead of leaving, him and my sister had planned to make it seem like he'd left, then he could stay another night. He then would wake up before my mom shouted my sister up for work like she did every morning, and would hide in the crawl space and sleep there until everybody had left for the day. One small hitch in the plan that they did not think of was, you guessed it, me. They'd forgotten I was home and conveniently sat directly opposite the only exit for most of the day, so he was trapped. When I knocked, he hid himself behind the door and held it shut to prevent being locked in. Anyways, my mom swiftly told him to get the heck out and not come back. Sadly, this was not the last time we saw that guy, as it turned around he'd stolen quite a bit of money from my sister's room while he'd been hiding out, and then because my sister makes terrible decisions, got her pregnant and proceeded to smash windows, trying to get at her and the baby around a year later. For a while, we lived in the same city when I went to uni, and he was spending time at the prison there for stabbing someone in a completely different town. A super guy. Oh, and a small topper to all of this, as I mentioned earlier, the only rooms upstairs are mine and my sister's bedrooms. He'd been in there for close to 14 hours with no access to a toilet, but no worry for this guy because he had lots of empty bottles to piss in, which he kindly left behind for us to clean up. And finally, around a year later, as mom was getting the Christmas decorations out, which were at the far back of the storage space, she found a small bag filled with feces. I should mention, where she found it is exactly next to where my bed is on the other side of the wall. The rustling that woke me up that day, it was him, taking a poop amongst our tinsel and tree. So, sister's baby daddy, who hid in our crawl space and used it as a private bathroom, that's not me, yeah? This happened to me 2 to 3 years ago. I was around 23 at the time. I am a female and I live in Romania. One night I was coming home from class. Masters. Classes start after 6 p.m. and end at 10 p.m. or around 11 p.m. I had to take the subway for about 12 stops. The destination I had to get off at was the end of the line for the subway. At that time, there wouldn't be many people in the subway. I'm a pretty lonely person. All I need is my headset and my music and I'm good to go. Said and done. I plug in my music, pick the furthest chair in the subway, away from the only 2 people that were taking the subway with me at the time. So far so good, until I see with the corner of my eye, a silhouette approaching me and sitting right next to me. It was a man, fairly built, dark hair, wearing glasses, a black shirt with a black hoodie, and a sickening smile. He doesn't engage in talking with me, but would just stare at my phone as I would browse through my music. I can hear him breathing heavily. Not like painfully, but still like he was feeling something very strong. I feel uneasy, so I decide to change my seat and go even further behind, trying to avoid him without looking like a freak myself. I don't know to who. There was just another person with us the whole way. I guess that kind of scared me even more. I pick a new chair, sit down, plug my headset again, and proceed with the remaining 6 to 12 stops on my way home. I see the silhouette growing bigger and bigger and a breeze running on my skin as I realize the guy is again sitting right next to me. Glancing in midair, dead eyes, a big smile, staring right into my phone. I panic. There are still 4 stops to go. I have nowhere to hide. I look after the other person in the subway trying to sit next to her, thinking that strength comes in numbers. She is no longer there. I start shaking a bit, but not allowing the creeper to notice me being vulnerable. I stand up, go to the door, and just decide to stand until my stop comes. This way he won't sit next to me, right? Well, he comes straight after me and sits on the chair right near the door, and because he couldn't see my phone, on which he was so focused so far, from that angle, he fixates me right in my soul with his black dead eyes and says, "Hi, gorgeous. Why are you avoiding me?" I'm freaking out as I look at my phone trying to call my boyfriend or message him, and he stops me by saying, "I know nobody will help you. You would have sent an SOS message by now, and I know you didn't." That moment I realize I am cornered. He has been focusing on my phone to see who I was talking to, trying to figure out if I panicked, trying to see if I would ask someone for help. He had me cornered pretty bad. I had the luck to reach my stop, as I would delay any reaction or ignore him so that he would repeat whatever he wanted to say. I drop off and run for the exit, not looking back. I get out at the surface and I don't see him anymore. This moment I put my phone in my purse and realize I had pepper spray with me all along. My heartbeat comes back to normal, as I know at least I have something to defend myself with, but still a long way to get home, and who knows if he is alone or not. I walk rather fast for maybe 5 minutes from the metro and feel a hand grabbing my wrist hard and pulling me back. Another hand covering my mouth, disabling me from screaming my lungs out. It was him. The same black hoodie, dark hair, and dead-eyed stalker. He was furious and said, "Running from me? How dare you run away from me? You should be honored. I give you attention. I am fairly built for a woman, 80 kilograms and 1.75 meters tall, so I guess he thought men don't find me beautiful or something and should feel blessed that a creep like him stalks me and tried to hurt me. Now, my phone is in my bag. I can't call the police. I can't reach for the pepper spray. I panic. I can't punch him in the crotch. I can't scratch him as I don't have long nails. His hand is still in my mouth. What do? I did the most desperate and disgusting thing I could think of just to save my life. I played along. I used my other hand to touch the inside of his thigh and mumble, "I'm sorry," while his hand was still on my mouth. He took his hand off and I repeated that I'm sorry. Didn't realize he was just flirting. He let his guard down and took his hand off my wrist. He asked me for my phone number and address to drop me off, but I refused, saying I'd rather add him on Facebook, and he agreed. I told him I'd reach for my phone, but instead picked the pepper spray and got him all over his face. Made tread cover both his eyes, nose, mouth, even his ears and hands. He instantly got all red, suffocating from the pepper and swelling. I called the police, told them what happened and what I did. They asked me if he is immobilized, and I said yes, as the effect wears off in like 45 minutes. Police arrived there 5 minutes later to see me shaking like a leaf and a man on the ground swollen like a pumpkin, throwing up and swearing at me between gasps of breath. He was arrested, and the police told me they had been looking for him for the past week, as they discovered the body of a 24-year-old woman in his apartment, with red hair. I have red hair too. The woman was his girlfriend, and ever since, he's never gotten back to his apartment. I don't know what he wanted to do with me. I can understand why he targeted me due to the similarities, but a stranger in the subway stalking women at midnight, trying to befriend them, or worse, murder them. I really hope I never meet you again. First, a little bit of background. I teach first grade in a high poverty area. This is rough territory with lots of gangs, hard drugs, and prostitution. Just a couple of years ago, the police arrested a woman and several men. The mom had pimped her 2 special needs daughters to the men for money to buy drugs. Obviously, you get the idea. This is not a good area to be alone in, especially after dark. Anyways, it was early September and I had a new student, named Grace. She was very timid, had low self-confidence, and always seemed very nervous. I kept a very close watch on her because I know these can be warning signs of abuse. One Monday, as I took my class outside to play, I noticed strange-looking marks on Grace's legs. Little round indentations marched from her calves to her thighs. She was in shorts. The spots were red and looked painful. I thought she might have some kind of skin rash, so I asked her how she got the marks. Grace told me in a nonchalant way that I was being bad after school on Friday, so Daddy had to take the brush to me again. I was dumbfounded and honestly a little bit confused. A brush? Then I understood. Her father had beaten her with a bristle brush hard enough to leave indentations on her skin 2 days later. Now, I'm a mandated reporter and I take this seriously. I called CPS and they were there that afternoon to talk to Grace and photograph her injuries. At that point, I am out of the picture and CPS takes over. I don't get updates on the situation, so I had no idea what happened. Grace never returned to school, but her father did. He showed up one evening as I was preparing to leave the school, about 5:30, parked his truck in such a way that I could not move my car, then jumped out carrying a baseball bat. He screamed all kind of things at me about how I terrified his daughter because she was in custody, how I was a nosy bitch who didn't know my damn place, and how now he was going to show me exactly what I deserved. He meant it too. The man had the cold eyes of a fish, and I knew if he could, he would do serious harm to me. I didn't know what to do. Couldn't run from him. He was massive and had at least 100 pounds on me. All muscle. If I locked myself in my car, I'd be a sitting duck while he smashed the windows in with the bat. So I said goodbye to my dignity and started screaming for help. Now, I'm petite, but years of teaching have given me the lung power of a megaphone, and I can be pretty loud. People across the street heard me and came out to see what was happening. The great part of working in a small community is that you know everyone and they know you, especially if you are a teacher. A couple fathers of former students came over to help while the nearby woman dialed 911. He never did calm down and kept screaming about all the things he was going to do to me for turning him into CPS. Even when the police arrived, he continued his tirade. They arrested him, but I'm not sure what the charges were. I don't think they can get him for assault since he never touched me. For the rest of the school year, I had an armed escort to my car after school. Again, small community and our police are wonderful people. Interestingly enough, I had somebody from one of the local gangs tell me that we're keeping a watch because I had taught his little sister earlier and she liked me. That was a surreal moment, let me tell you. I went to the police station a few days ago to put down a complaint about some person who scammed me when I was trying to get a graphics card. A guy who seems nice overheard the conversation and proposed me to come over as he had spare electronic equipment that he did not use anymore, saying that if it could help someone else, he'd be glad to give it out. Now, I didn't really put any hope into it, as it wasn't likely that I'd find something interesting, but I took up the offer. He didn't have that fishy person aura, so I accepted coming over in a few days. I wouldn't show up alone though, just in case. A few days after, I go to the house with my brother. First, the guy is not wearing a mask and tries to shake my hand. There's this old person in the background watching us, beer in hand. I can see from here that the yard is a complete mess, things everywhere. He guides us inside and we take a look around, and then he starts pulling stuff out of a bag, and it's like 15 to 20 years old of a graphics card that are completely worthless. So I told him it ain't gonna work, it was too old. He tells us to follow him to the garage, which is even more of a mess than the yard. Things laying everywhere, and there's a very dirty pool, not even covered, although we are still in winter. He shows us one of the first generation of graphics cards. Old and bulky. I tell him it's not going to work either, and he takes us to a shed behind the house with even more stuff. A very shady place in a weird alley, and freaked out a little bit because the older person who hadn't said a single word was following us. He rumbles through his shed, telling me the card he intended to give me was somewhere, but he can't find it. Too bad. I prepare to go away, but then he asks me if we could look at a PC that doesn't boot. I accept and go inside the room, which is apparently the kids' room and is as messy as every other room. I approach the computer and it's missing keys. It's kind of dirty everywhere. I sit down with my brother and starts fiddling with the computer. The grandpa appears out of nowhere and sits behind my brother, which kind of freaks me out more by the way he looks at us. Trying to fix the PC. And as I'm doing so, the mother comes in and tells me that she doesn't know much about computers and such, but that she goes on the dark web. She asks me if I can check every device in the house to make sure they haven't been pirated and that she's being spied on. At that point, I look at my brother, confused, and we kind of mentally communicate, yeah, we need to get out, it's starting to get weird. I tell the guy that I can't seem to fix it and that it's above what I know, and he's okay with it. The old man lights up a cigarette in the room and we get out of there. The guy keeps us and talks for like 5 minutes. They seemed like they wanted us to stay. We tell them that we have a bus to catch and kind of walk quickly out of here. The mother stops us and asks if we're going to come back to inspect if their devices are pirated, and I just say that we'll contact them again. Panicked and blocked the number when I got out of there.